This is Ed Robinson of Kensington College, continuing our lessons on Excel VBA. We've been talking about the range object. We've already had a look at 2 videos on the range object, but now we will consider the resize property. The resize property will physically change the name of a range to a specified number of rows and columns. The top left cell of the new range remains fixed in place. Let me just make it very clear what area that I'm just talking about. I'll just put a border around that so we can just refer to that range very simply. Then I'll put a command button on here as per usual, and then I'll double click on that, and then I'm going to take the code from here, range B2 to D4, and then paste that into my editor, my VBE, my Visual Basic Editor. Let's take a look what that says. Range B2 to D4, which is this particular range here. Resize 2 says take 2 rows and 2 columns. Now don't forget, it's always the anchor point is the top left. I'll just take the design off up here so I can run my code. Now, so we start off with this range here, resize that to 2 rows and 2 columns, in other words to there, using the top left cell as the anchor point. So let me just click the button and make sure that works. That indeed does work. What I want to do now is say resize 1, in which case that should resize to 1 row at the top. And I can also, if I want to resize row 1 column, I need to put a comma in there as well. And then if I do that, you can see that I resize the first column that way. What I'd like to do now is just an exercise. You could fast forward on this to the next bit of theory, or you could just try this now yourself, but this is what I want to achieve. I want to be able to click into the table, and then when I click the command button, it's going to highlight the bottom row. And in there you could probably put the sums of the columns or something similar. This must work for any table in any position. So if I click in this table over here, and then I press the command button, you'll see that also selects the bottom row of that particular table. The first thing I would like to do is to be able to click in here and click the command button, in which case it should select the current region. Well, we could start off by dimming a range variable, and then we'll set the range equal to the current selection. So where I'm going to select the cell here, which is my selection, and then form the current region, which is this region here, and then finally I'm going to select that region. So you can see that if I click up here and then click the button, that does indeed select that current region. The next thing I want to do is to be able to extend the range down to here. So to do that, I need to use the resize, and I'm going to, well, why waste a good variable? Might as well use range to look at the extended range, and then I'm going to resize. Now resize by what? And this must be dynamic, so it's resized by a certain number of rows. So in this case, you could try it if you like with 4, and that should just do what we want, but we want to make it perfectly general. Well, perhaps it's not a bad idea to just use a bit of fixed code and just make sure that's working, so that selects that range as required. Now what we need to do is to make it perfectly general, so we need to pick up the number of rows in the previous range. Now was that it was the number of rows in the previous range, and then we want to count. Well, that value in fact was 3. If you recall that we had, that's the range there was selected, so it's got a value of 3. Well, we simply want to make it 4, so we can simply add 1 to it, and that should work. Let's try it. I'll click in here, command button, and indeed now you'll see that it actually works for that as well. So it extends the range in general by 1 row. So don't forget our objective. We want to be able to make a selection, and then the ultimate thing to do is to find that row at the end. So in that case we need to get that particular row. Well, to do that, we take our range object and we need to take the rows property in a different context here using rows, and then the number of rows, well, in this case here, that is going to be 3, so it's the third row. So you could put a 3 in there and try that, but we want to make it perfectly general. So how many rows has this particular range got? And the answer is that should turn out to be 4 in the case on 3, 4 on the case on the left, and 5 in the case on the right. So we should be able to therefore just select that, and that, well, I need to get rid of that. Okay, so that should just select the, if I click in on here, and then it does the bottom row, and correspondingly here it also does the bottom row. Well, as an exercise, you might like to be able to put in some sum formulas here to sum up the individual columns, and do that automatically in each case. So if you were to click here, the sums ought to appear on the bottom row. I could leave that to you for an exercise which we may consider later. The areas collection is a collection of ranges within a range. So let me just illustrate that by, I'll just get rid of this, clear this for the moment. Then I'll just, I've got 2 areas of interest. I'll just show you those. I'll just be that area, that range there, and DE, that range there. They will constitute 2 range areas which constitute a range in itself, so that the whole range consists of 2 areas. How would I actually show you that? If I use this bit of code here, put that into the VBE, into my command button, and you see it says here range B2 to B3, which is obviously my first area here, and this one here D2 to E3, which is this here, and so that should be selected when I click the command button, which indeed it does. So we've got 2 areas. This is an area within the one particular range, but notice that there's no inverted commas here. It's just a comma in between the 2 particular areas. We could, for example, message box out the addresses of each of those areas. We've got a range, and then we've got the range which consists of these 2 areas, and then for I equals 1 to range areas count, well, it's 2. We've got 2 areas within that one particular range, and it says areas, so it's going to be areas 1, areas 2, and the respective addresses of those areas ought to be message boxed out. So B2 to, you can hardly see that, probably B2 to B3 is the first area, and then the next area is D2 to E3, for example. You may consider this as a practical application of what we've been talking about as far as selecting areas. If we wanted the customer to only be able to select single cells like this in 2 particular ranges, I've just used the control key in that case, then you see that that is a valid selection. But you don't want the customer to be doing 1 here and 2 there, so I've held the control key down there. You'll see that you get a warning there, you must select single cells. But also, if you were to do more than 1, I'll use the control key to do more than 1 area, then that would give you a message as well that you must be able to make 2 selections only. Similarly, if you only made 1 selection, then it would tell you you must make 2 selections. So let's just simply take a look at the code and see how that's done. This has gone off the screen a bit here, so by the way, I'll just remind you how we make a line continuation character. This probably caused a bit of confusing in my book, actually. People don't realize that this is continued like this. So if you want to break up a line, I'll just remind you, you press the space and then the underscore and then enter. Space, underscore, enter, and then you'll see that those 2 lines are effectively on the same line. Now let's see how it works. if selection areas is not equal to 2, what that means is if you make one selection, for example, then click it, it gives you a warning that you must make 2 selections. If you were to do 3 selections, then it gives you the same warning. So it must be exactly equal to 2. If it's not equal to 2, you get that message, and then because it's an if followed by an else if, that's the end of the story. So on the other hand, if it says here, if else if selection areas count, so you must have 1 selection in the first area and 1 selection in the second area, and if that's not correct, if they're not both equal to 1, then you'll get the else if situation, and that's end of story. So in other words, if it's not equal to 1, so if we do 2 here and 1 there, then you'll get that message there. But if you were to do it properly, 1 here and 1 here, and do the command button, then you get the messages, then you get the OK, because it's past all of these hurdles here. The if and the else if considered as hurdles. It jumps over each of those hurdles and gets to this hurdle here, gets to this here, and just finally gives you a message box saying that's okay. So you could take a look at that as a practical application if you wish. Now, for those doing the class, I'd like to ask to do an exercise. Don't worry, it's not going to be all of this. It's just part of this procedure. Let me explain what's going on here. We're talking about a mail merge in Word. You may have used it, in which case you know that when you have you're asked to do a mail merge, then you have your information in some sort of tabular form, and then that's quite straightforward to do. You've got here 4 names and addresses. You can send off 4 different letters with the different names and addresses. So that's the idea of a general mail merge, and it's fine when you have a table like this. But what happens if you don't have a structured table? If your data comes in some sort of mailing list like this, and it's all over the place, you can't really say what's the postcode, and Word's not clever enough to do that. Well, the best thing I could come up with is an idea of colouring each of these. As you can see, they've been done already. Colour them, and then we can allocate them to this particular table, and this is the job that we would do in Excel VBA. So we start off with our raw code, if you like. It's higgledy-piggledy, and you don't know what's the postcode and so on. So what I said was, okay, let's click on the postcode over here, and then I want to I've clicked on it. I use the control key to select all the postcodes down here, and then I click on this button here, which will colour them all the same. I do the same for city. You see, I click on city up the top here, and then go through the city, which is London, and so on, and pick out the cities. That's the best I could come up with, really, and then colour that, and they all go the same colour. I made an extra little routine here, by the way. I've got a problem when the name and address comes in like this. I want to be able to separate them. What I do, I devise a little bit of code, and you could do this. You may want to do this as an exercise. If I double click on it, and that just splits up the 3 bits of the surname and the first name and the title separately into three, and I just double click on each of these. You see, now I could easily go through and take surname. I'll click on surname up here, click on that, and as I go through, and then I could color those. Right, now since I've now colored them all, I could do the others later. The title, well, I'll do the title. Click on there and go control key, and then color those with the same color. So it's obviously picking up the color there and applying it to the others, which is what I want you to do in a moment. Okay, and so on. Then I could say allocate, and you can see it very nicely, I might say, puts them all into a table like that, and then you could use this table easily in Word to do a mail merge. So to cut a long story short, as far as the homework is concerned, I would like to be able to click on, say, the city, and then hold down the control key and then select them and then click on color, and they all should go the same color. So you see it needs to pick up the color from the first cell and then apply it to the other cells. So that's the exercise. If you wanted to, you could also try the other exercise, whereby if I double click on this cell up here, then you separate them up. You could do that as an extra exercise, but that's really revising previous chapters, string handling.